responsibility, but that until that time happens, we're going to continue to bear the fiscal burden of protecting our citizens. And you know, Representative Turner's right. We set priorities on this every time. Even in our leanest budgets in 2011, we made sure that our public safety officers were taken care of. And so I think that sets clearly what our understanding is, that first and foremost, public safety is an important thing. But just correct me if I'm wrong on this, but there is not an end point to it, I don't think. I think that we may change the complexion of the people that we have working in different parts of the border and the type of work that's going on and stuff. But that until, you know, the federal government steps in and says, you know, the border in Texas is too porous, we're not going to have adequate border patrol down there. We've got to fill the holes, and we depend on y'all with the expertise to help us get to the most cost-effective way of doing that.
And absolutely. And the strategic intent is that our federal partners will be able to do this. No question about it. And I'd be remiss of not mentioning that the state legislature, the Texas state legislature, saw the issues long ago and invested substantial amount of money. We could not do what we're doing right now without what the Texas state legislature has invested in the Department of Public Safety and with game wardens and Texas military forces. There's no question that we couldn't do what we're doing right now.
These men and women have invested approximately $800 million of Texas tax dollars, not federal dollars, into securing the border and protecting the lives of all 26 million Texans. And you're owed a big thanks. Senator Nelson?
Just, Representative Zerwas, I had my button pushed and was going to make exactly that same point. And I have to tell you, I am very grateful that we have made this commitment for $800 million, but Representative Turner, that's $800 million that I wish we could spend on education and health and human services. Border security is not just a Texas issue, it is a national issue. And the federal government should be putting the tab for that $800 million so that we could spend it on other needs that we have in Texas.
I think all of our hope is that this next Congress puts a bill on the President's desk to dramatically increase the size of the Border Patrol and solve this problem. It should not be just resting on the shoulders of the people of Texas. Although when the federal government fails to perform one of their constitutional duties, I personally believe that it's not just the right, but it's an obligation of the state of Texas to protect our citizens. In the public testimony, I have a request from Representative Matt Schaefer to speak to the LBB. I'm going to ask him to come to the witness table. Representative, how are you? Colonel, you might wait in case there are questions.
Yes.
Representative, thank you very much.
Thank you, Lieutenant Governor Dewhurst, Speaker Strauss, members. Good to see y'all. Bottom line up front for my testimony is that this budgetary decision regarding the Guard will have the practical effect of taking that employment of them away from the next legislature. And I say that because just in the last few weeks we've been able to get them up to the 1,000%, the 1,000 troops on the border operating at full strength on all 8 cylinders. And by every conversation I've had, they are effective. They are a persistent set of eyes on the border. They also have a deterrent effect, and they are a force multiplier for our DPS troopers. But understand the lives of the way Guardsmen work. Okay, I'm a reservist, so I can speak to this. When you send 800 of them home by January, and then begin to dwindle that down even farther by the end of March, down to basically nothing, you can't just turn around and say, oh, we now want to have this debate in the legislature and send them back. As a practical matter, that doesn't work. So you take those people, you send them home, they go back to their civilian lives, they go back to their jobs and their private endeavors. And so now, if the legislature comes forward, and maybe we've had, because of the President's executive order, had a significant uptick after Christmas, maybe some event has taken place. You know, the oil prices have a big impact on Mexico. Maybe events turn and the numbers come back up. And now all of a sudden a Governor Abbott and a newly elected legislature wants to come forward and say, it's going to take us a long time to hire these new DPS troopers. We can do the overtime, and that's great, but that stretches them a little bit. Local law enforcement, as you've heard, is already stretched. To quote Colonel McCraw, the more bodies, the more you can detect. I can tell you from my military experience, a camera is great, but it doesn't replace a brain and 2 ears out and eyes out on the line. And it's a long distance on the border. We're basically just covering the Rio Grande Valley sector right now, about 90 miles. Laredo is pretty bad too for some of this activity. We really, in my opinion, ought to be expanding the use of the Guard until we can bridge the gap with more law enforcement. People who are more suited for this long-term activity. Senator Hinojosa, you've made some great points. What I'm telling you though, I would love to see an extra $30 million added to this request that you have right now, which would be about $10 million a month, which is about what the Guard is costing you, to preserve the decision on how to use the Guard for the next legislature and the next governor. Because if you just say, oh, well, we can debate that in March, no, you can't. And when you talk to General Hamilton and others, they will tell you that they would prefer that you give them some predictability so that the lives of these men and women out on the line can be scheduled appropriately. It is operationally disruptive, it's impractical, and it's just not the way you would treat the Texas military forces for us to make a political decision in March to send them back down based on political will or based on new events on the ground. So what I'm really trying to stress is that the budget number you have right now locks you into a practical course on the ground that we may regret in March. And I personally think it's a mistake. And I personally think that we ought to be utilizing the Guard even more until we can get more law enforcement people hired. Let me tell you, they are a force multiplier. Even if they are not arresting, they are eyes on the ground, they are support for a lone trooper out there on the road. They have vehicles and CRO systems that the DPS does not have to the same extent. They have some unique technical aspects to their job that the DPS doesn't have at this point. And so I think we have the potential for even more numbers to come. And until we can hire more law enforcement, keep the Guard in place at status quo, add $30 million to this number, and that will preserve the decision for the next legislature and the next governor. And then we can debate it, because I think there's a lot of things that Senator Hinojosa has said and others that we all need to discuss as a body and make the decision whether we're going to, the Guard is not the long-term solution. We understand that. Ultimately, this is more of a law enforcement capacity. But it's a long distance on the border. And without those men, and we've just gotten them up to full strength. And, you know, McCraw has been given a set of numbers to work with and says, yes, I can make more efficient use of those numbers if you give them to me as he has proposed. I, for one, speaking for many people in my district, say, let's take all the extra things that Director McCraw wants to do, plus leave the Guard in place until we can see what our budget's going to be. We'll have more fiscal information at that point. And we will have not done something to operationally damage what's happening. You can't replace one-to-one, in my mind, a game camera with a sergeant, okay? Sometimes maybe the camera might be better than the sergeant, but most of the time it's not. And you can do a lot of things with the Guard. They are effective at what we have asked them to do. And so I would just urge this body to not take that tool out of the tool belt just yet. Let's wait and see just a little while longer. We're just talking about 3 or 4 months. $30 to $40 million is not going to cause us that much heartburn. It's a lot of money, but it's a big priority.
Thank you, Representative. Are there additional members of the public who would like to testify? Thank you very much. Members, any additional comments from the members of the LBB? Public hearing is now concluded. Members, is there a motion on the proposal in front of us?
Yes, I move the legislative budget board adopt the governor's budget execution proposal as submitted.
Is there a second to the motion?
Second.
The clerk will call the roll.
Governor Dewhurst.
Aye.
Senator Eltime.
Aye.
Senator Estes.
Aye.
Senator Hinojosa.
Aye.
Senator Nelson.
Aye.
Speaker Strauss.
Aye.
Representative Darby.
Aye.
Representative Otto.
Aye.
Representative Turner.
Aye.
Representative Surwas.
Aye.
There being 5 ayes and no noes from the part of the Senate and 5 ayes and no noes on the part of the House, the motion is adopted.
Thank you, members, and thank you, Representative, for your testimony. Again, General Nichols, I would like to personally say how much the state of Texas is indebted to you individually, General Hamilton, and all the fine members of the Reserve, of the National Guard and the Texas Reserves. So thank you. Representative, thank you. You all done an excellent job. The fifth order of business today is to receive a report and testimony from the Comptroller of Public Accounts regarding the financial condition of the state as required by Section 322.03 of the Government Code. The chair recognizes John Rucker.
Morning, Governor, Mr. Speaker, members. My name is John Hellman, Chief Revenue Estimator, Controller's Office. I'm here this morning to give you a brief overview of the current state of the Texas economy and our revenue collections. Hopefully you have a packet in front of you, members. PowerPoint presentation. For many of you, this will sound familiar. I was here on August the 5th. In many ways, our economy is still performing as it was at that time. So this will sound quite familiar. If you would please turn to page 3, members. As we have been for some time, members, the employment in our state is growing faster than employment in the nation as a whole. As a matter of fact, we just got some data from the Texas Workforce Commission, our latest data, showing that we added about 35,000 jobs this last reporting month. To put that into a little bit of context, members, 35,000 jobs added in the space of 1 month means it's growing about twice as fast as our population as a whole. That is the primary reason over the last several years why our unemployment rate in our state has been pressed down as far as it has. We're currently standing at about a 5.1% unemployment rate. Historically, this is quite low, and we are on the cusp now of entering into the 4 range of unemployment rates, historically a low range. Without going into some testimony I'm given many times in the past, but still I think of interest to this committee, would be the fact that Texas exited this past recession, which is now receding in our memory, but exited this past recession much, much stronger than the nation as a whole. It's only very recently that the United States as a whole regained all the jobs, 8.7 million jobs that were lost in the recession. And that was years after Texas recovered the 400,000 jobs we lost. We have currently added 1 million jobs past our peak that existed before the recession began. On page 4 are a few other metrics which carry the same message, and that is that Texas continues to grow faster than the nation as a whole. The third bullet down, you'll see that our gross product, a measurement of the total value of goods and services we produce in our state each year, grew last year at 3.7%, a very robust number. The number for the United States was 2.4%. So in keeping with the employment data we just discussed, here is yet another measure indicating that our state is growing faster than the United States.
John, if I said that,
Yes, sir.
that if memory serves, the gross state product for Texas in 2003, 11 years ago, was 750 billion.
I would not be surprised.
And today it's 1.4 trillion.
Correct, sir. Stat that I threw in, many times it's kind of a fun stat, but I think also it kind of gives you a sense of the overall size of the Texas economy, which some of the numbers we're talking about here this morning, it's hard to get a grip on that. If Texas were a nation unto itself, we would be the 12th largest economy in the world. Only slightly behind Canada and actually larger than the country of Australia.
How much behind Canada are we, John?
Not too much, sir.
Not too much. Good to hear. Good to hear. Good to hear. Now we gotta go.
On page 5, a little bit about the housing market in Texas.
Work harder, firstly.
Single-family homes are being constructed once again in Texas. In fact, for the most recent 12 months, our construction of single-family homes is up 8.6%. However, in bullet 1, notice that last part, multifamily housing permits, primarily apartments, are up 26.2%. And this is a real change that we've seen in the last 5 to 6 years, in that we seem to have moved a bit away from single-family homes as a nation and somewhat more towards the construction of multifamily or apartment units, could be townhomes. Existing home sales are starting to exhibit a slower growth rate, and that is because we're actually using up the inventory of existing homes we have. We are down to only a 3.7-month inventory of existing homes in Texas. That is right at the all-time historic low for that figure. The price for homes, as you would expect, is on the rise. So the growth rate for these existing home sales is slowing down simply because we have fewer and fewer of them in an attractive price range that are actually available for sale. I would point out that our existing home sales are now somewhat below 290,000 in 1 year. This is almost back to the level we saw in the summer of '05 and on into '06 when we reached the all-time highest sales figure we ever saw. However, the construction of these single-family homes is nowhere near where we were in that same time period. This year, we're probably going to build about 90,000 new single-family homes in our state versus over 160,000 10 years ago. If you will turn to page 6, members, certainly topical today. When I wrote this and turned it in for our meeting here today, the price indeed was in the $75 range and had been for some time. We all went on our Thanksgiving break and the world changed. This morning, as I was walking back over here, I consulted my mobile device and it said $68. And that's actually up quite a bit from the opening this morning. Oil has been quite volatile in price. I know I've testified on this a number of times. From a peak of $134 in the summer of 2008, I think we can all remember when gasoline was up over $4 per gallon. It dropped to less than 40 quite rapidly, and then rebounded with equal rapidity. What we're seeing today, I cannot tell you this morning whether this is the beginning of a trend or simply one of the many cyclical ups and downs, the erratic ups and downs we see in the price of oil. Natural gas prices, quite steady. They're going up a little bit right now because we're going into the winter heating season. The number of operating rigs in our state remains high. It does not appear as though we have had nearly enough time for whatever change these prices may bring, these declines in oil prices. We haven't had nearly enough time for that to work through to be represented by fewer rotary rigs operating in our state. Right now, we're at an almost historic high of over 900 rigs. The real point to bring home, and I know I've made this before, but it bears repeating, is that In the last 7 years, we have more than doubled the oil production in our state. We have had several years when oil production actually went up approximately 30% from year to year. 2/3 of all this comes from the Eagle Ford Shale area. Now, one thing I have noticed in the last couple
John,
of
the
days.
U.S.
Yes,
oil
sir.
production this past year increased roughly 1 million barrels per day. Next year is estimated to increase another 1 million barrels.
That's what I hear, and I would like to add a little bit of something. Thank you, Governor. It is true, however, that if you look at Texas oil production, while it is still growing and growing robustly, it is not growing as fast. The initial years of opening up the Eagle Ford Shale area, when we had 20 to 30% increase in production, they appear to be over, and this field is moving into some degree of maturity. So, sir, whether we can see that kind of growth for the entire United States going forward, I couldn't say. But certainly, the growth in Texas production is moderating. On pages 7, 8, and 9, this is a summary of anticipated state economic trends that we could see for the year that we're in, fiscal 15. Generally speaking, what it's saying here is that we see a continual period of solid economic growth, however moderated. We talked about the unemployment rate going all the way down to 5.1%. Pretty soon, we're going to be looking at perhaps going into the 4% unemployment range. At some point, all the jobs that are going to be have been occupied by job seekers, and we're going to have ever fewer jobs being opened up. We would expect the growth in our jobs in our state to start to decline for that simple reason. Personal income continues to grow. Real gross product also continues to grow. And our Texas population, and this is always an amazing number to me, will actually be up over 27 million people this fiscal year. Now, a couple of points I'd like to make, please, in closing, about the economy. And I think this is brought home to all of us with the decline in oil prices over the Thanksgiving holiday. The economy does fluctuate up and down. And in the last perhaps 10 to 15 years, it has an increased degree of volatility. I don't know, and I can't tell this group this morning what oil prices are going to do the rest of today, tomorrow, or the next month. But certainly that will be reflected in the condition of the Texas economy. Members, you also have a set of 4 tables that aren't written on like mine, but they look like this. And this is a summary of Texas revenue collections for the entirety of fiscal 14. They are broken out between general revenue and just all funds. And if I could give the committee just a very quick summary of what is here. The state sales tax, of course, is our largest single tax by a large margin. We see moderating growth in 14. We had a double-digit growth in 12, came down to a 7% growth in 13. In 14, we have a 5.6% growth. Much of this has been supported by oil and gas, but also, since that's only about 10 to 14% of the Texas economy, retail spending and spending by other parts of our economy. And Senator Nelson, as we were talking about a short number of weeks ago, 1 out of every 11 sales tax dollars is actually represented by people eating out.
I'm doing my part.
Motor vehicle sales tax, very similar pattern. The numbers are slightly larger. Last year was 8.6% increase. We are seeing not only more cars sold in our state, we have a greater population every year. Also, the value of these cars seems to be going up somewhat each year. I will say that for both the sales tax and the motor vehicle sales tax, We have started off this fiscal year, the first several months, quite strongly. The franchise tax, we brought in about $4.8 billion in 13. In 14, $4.7 billion. The effect there was a slight growth in profitability, a slight increase in the underlying basis for that tax. However, House Bill 500 had the effect, by passing along some additional tax reductions, of offsetting that to some degree, such that the overall tax went down by about $100 million. Governor, Mr. Speaker, that concludes my prepared presentation.
Thank you very much. Members, I imagine there are questions for Mr. Gentleman. If there's not, virtually every business that I'm familiar with personally, my own, runs contingency calculations. Has the Comptroller's Office looked at what different price levels, the drop in the price of oil from $100 several months ago down to $70, $60, $50, $40, but due to our oil severance taxes and the resulting decline in the service industry, loss of jobs, et cetera?
Certainly.
The dynamic analysis.
Certainly, yes, sir. This not only is an important industry to our state, but it does, as you say, ripple through the rest of our entire economy. This is an exceedingly complex dynamic, however, because all producers react to prices in a different way. The wells they are operating all have different break-even points, some quite a bit higher than others. Some operators have sold their production forward into the future at a fixed price, thereby insulating them for a period of time from any of these price changes. So again, this is an extremely complex dynamic, but to answer your question, Governor, yes, we are looking at this, we're concerned about it, and we are monitoring it.
And I'm sorry?
Monitoring it.
Do you have any conclusion at the present time? Do you have any numbers that if oil falls to $70 or stays at $70 or goes down to $60 or $50 or $40, what effect it would have not only in the service industry, loss of jobs, since the oil industry is not just the oil industry, it's a ripple effect. It's the whole service from dry cleaners to cleaners to restaurants, et cetera.
No, sir, I don't have anything to share today.
Any additional questions, members? There not being any more questions, thank you.
Thank you, sir.
The last item, Mr. Speaker, is to adjourn. Do we have a motion? Move to adjourn. Well done, well done. Members, is there objection? The chair hears none, and the legislative budget board meeting today is adjourned.